There is something deeply human about the thought of a lost city. It speaks to a fundamental curiosity within us, a desire to uncover secrets buried by time. But when that city isn't just hidden in a jungle or beneath the waves, but actively consumed by a desert, the mystery takes on an entirely different character. Imagine a vast, silent sea of sand, where the sun bleaches bones and the wind erases footprints. It is a landscape that seems designed to forget, to swallow whole civilizations and keep their secrets. Yet, against all odds, whispers persist. Stories of places that once pulsed with life, where water flowed and great buildings reached for the sky, only to be abandoned, their memories left to the shifting dunes. This is not just archaeology, it is a real-life treasure hunt on an epic scale, a puzzle where the clues are fragments of pottery, half-buried walls, and legends passed down through generations. These were not places of myth or fantasy. They were real cities populated by people who mastered the art of survival in the most unforgiving environments on Earth. They built empires in the desert, creating oases of culture and commerce where logic said none could exist. They dug intricate canals to capture fleeting rainwater, erected towering temples to their gods, and established trade routes that connected distant worlds. For centuries, even millennia, they thrived, and then they vanished. The reasons are as varied as the cities themselves: climate change that turned fertile lands to dust, wars that shattered their defenses, economic collapse that severed their lifelines, or perhaps a slow, quiet exodus as the sand began to win its endless war. They disappeared so completely that for ages they existed only in travelers' tales and ancient manuscripts, their very locations becoming a matter of speculation and debate. Today, we are going on a journey to find them. We will traverse the globe from the scorching sands of the Arabian Peninsula to the immense dunes of the Sahara, from the high deserts of the Americas to the forgotten corners of Asia. We are about to explore 25 desert cities that vanished without a trace, each with its own unique story of rise and fall. We will walk through the ghostly silence of Petra, carved into rose-red cliffs, and ponder the sudden abandonment of the cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde. We will search for the fabled wealth of Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands, and examine the enigmatic ruins of Great Zimbabwe. This is a story of human ambition, resilience, and ultimately mystery. It is a testament to our drive to build, and a haunting reminder of how even the greatest achievements can be reclaimed by the earth. So, let's begin our exploration of these enigmatic places and see what secrets the desert is finally ready to give up. Our journey begins in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, with a city whose legend is as vast as the desert that swallowed it, Ubar. For centuries, it was known only as a shimmering mirage in historical texts, a place of almost unimaginable wealth and sin, mentioned in the Quran as Aram of the Pillars and celebrated in the tales of 1001 Nights. This was no ordinary settlement. Ubar was the epicenter of the ancient world's most valuable commodity, frankincense. In an era before global trade routes were firmly established, the aromatic resin of the frankincense tree was worth its weight in gold, used in religious ceremonies, medicines, and as a luxury item from Rome to India. The caravans that carried this precious cargo across the emptiness of the Rub al-Khali, the aptly named Empty Quarter, would have converged on Ubar, making it a bustling, cosmopolitan hub where fortunes were made and the sounds of different languages filled the air. It was a city built on scent, its prosperity literally rising like smoke from the altars of distant empires. Yet this incredible wealth came with a price, at least in the legends. Stories circulated of a people grown arrogant and corrupt, their moral decay leading to a divine punishment that saw Ubar vanish beneath the sands as if it had never existed. For generations, historians dismissed it as a purely mythological place, a cautionary tale rather than a historical reality. The turning point came from an unexpected source, the stars, or rather, our view from them. In the 1980s and 90s, a fascinating collaboration between explorers, archaeologists, and NASA began to piece the puzzle together. Using data from the Space Shuttle program, specifically radar that could penetrate the dry surface sands, researchers identified ancient tracks, the fossilized paths of camel caravans that had traversed the desert thousands of years ago. These ghost roads all seemed to lead to a single, promising location in modern-day Oman. The subsequent excavations revealed something astounding: the remains of a large fortified city with a massive octagonal fortress and towers that had collapsed into a large sinkhole. This dramatic discovery provided a compelling, scientific explanation for Ubar's fate that echoed the old legends of divine retribution. The city's lifeblood was not just its frankincense but water. It sat atop a vast limestone cavern, a natural reservoir that sustained its population and its lucrative trade. Over centuries of use, the water table dropped, weakening the cavern's roof. The final collapse would have been catastrophic and sudden. The very foundation of the city literally gave way, swallowing large sections of the fortress and crippling the oasis that made life possible there. With its water source gone, the relentless desert quickly moved in. The sands of the Rub al-Khali did not slowly creep in. They rushed into the vacuum, burying the ruins and sealing Ubar's fate for over a millennium. The City of Pillars was not struck down by an angry god, but by the failure of the geology that supported it, a stark lesson in the delicate balance between civilization and the environment. While the fate of Ubar was sealed by the ground collapsing beneath it, another legendary desert city experienced a different kind of vanishing act, one not of physical disappearance, but of fading from human memory. From the sands of Arabia, we travel north to the dramatic canyons of Jordan, to the story of Petra. Most of us have seen the iconic image of the treasury's intricate facade glowing in the rose-red stone, but that famous view represents only the final moment of a long rediscovery. For centuries before that, Petra was a ghost, a city that the Western world had completely forgotten. Its story is not one of a single, catastrophic collapse, but a slow, quiet slipping away from history's stage. The brilliance of Petra began with its founders, the Nabateans. They were not just builders, they were hydrological engineers of genius. In a region that receives only a few inches of rain a year, they mastered the art of capturing every precious drop. They carved intricate channels into the cliff sides to divert flash floods, constructed vast underground cisterns lined with waterproof plaster, and designed a complex network of dams and reservoirs. This system could store millions of gallons of water, turning a barren canyon into a veritable oasis. This wasn't just about survival, it was the foundation of an empire. With a guaranteed water supply, the Nabateans could offer respite and resources to the endless caravans traveling the lucrative trade routes between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Spices, silks, and most importantly, frankincense and myrrh flowed through Petra, and the Nabateans grew immensely wealthy by taxing this commerce. That wealth was poured directly into the rock itself. The Nabateans didn't just build with stone, they sculpted an entire city from the living cliff face. The treasury, or Al-Khosneh, is the most famous example, but it is merely the grand entrance to a sprawling metropolis of tombs, temples, and tombs. The entire city center was a bustling hub of life, with grand streets, markets, and a massive theater capable of seating thousands. For hundreds of years, Petra was a dazzling spectacle of power and prosperity, a testament to human ingenuity carved into an impossible landscape. But empires are fragile, and Petra's fortune was tied directly to the trade that sustained it. The turning point came with the rise of the Roman Empire, which gradually shifted trade routes to the sea. Palmyra, in modern-day Syria, became a new rival, siphoning off the caravans that had been Petra's lifeblood. While the city was eventually absorbed into Rome, its economic importance waned. The final blows, however, were likely delivered by nature itself. Historical records and geological evidence point to a series of catastrophic earthquakes in the 4th and 6th centuries. These quakes would have shattered the sophisticated water management system that was the city's heart. Without the ability to control water, the canyon was no longer an oasis but a death trap, vulnerable to devastating flash floods. The population dwindled, and by the time of the Crusades, Petra was little more than a rumor, a name in old texts with no known location. It became a place of legend, known only to local Bedouin tribes who kept it secret for generations. It was this very obscurity that allowed Petra to remain hidden, its magnificent structures preserved not by careful maintenance, but by silence and sand, waiting for the outside world to find it once again. If Petra's story is one of a slow fading from memory, then the tale of our next city is one of spectacular defiance and a swift, brutal fall. Moving north from Jordan into the vastness of the Syrian desert, we come to the magnificent ruins of Palmyra. This was not a city that quietly slipped away. It was a powerhouse that dared to challenge the might of Rome itself, and its ruins stand as a stark monument to the price of that ambition. Rising from an oasis in an otherwise waterless expanse, Palmyra was perfectly positioned to control the trade routes linking the Roman Empire with Persia, India, and China. The caravans that stopped here brought not only silks and spices but also immense wealth, which its inhabitants used to construct a city of breathtaking grandeur, a unique fusion of Eastern and Western architectural styles. The zenith of Palmyra's power is inextricably linked to one of the most formidable figures of the ancient world, Queen Zenobia. In the middle of the 3rd century, following the death of her husband, King Odenathus, Zenobia seized control as regent for her young son. But she was not content with merely maintaining the status quo. Ambitious, intelligent, and a brilliant military strategist, she saw an opportunity in Rome's temporary weakness during a period of internal crisis and external threats. Declaring her son emperor and herself empress, Zenobia launched a breathtaking military campaign. Her armies swept across the eastern Roman provinces, conquering Egypt and much of Anatolia, effectively carving out a Palmyran empire that stretched from the Nile to the Bosporus. For a few short years, she ruled over a territory that rivaled Rome's, and Palmyra stood as the capital of a budding superpower. This bold challenge to Roman authority, however, could not go unanswered. The Roman Emperor Aurelian, a hardened and effective soldier, marched east to confront the usurper. After a series of decisive battles, Aurelian's legions defeated Zenobia's forces and laid siege to Palmyra itself. The city, for all its wealth, could not withstand the focused might of a restored Roman war machine. Queen Zenobia was captured while attempting to flee, and the fate of the rebellious city was sealed. While Aurelian initially showed some mercy, a second Palmyran revolt prompted a final, devastating response. The Romans sacked Palmyra in 2273, destroying much of its military and political infrastructure and carrying off its treasures to Rome. The brief Palmyran Empire was extinguished, and with it, the city's golden age came to a sudden and violent end. Although Palmyra continued to exist for several more centuries, its role was drastically diminished. The destruction of its power and the shifting of trade routes sealed its economic decline. Slowly, the sands of the Syrian desert began to reclaim the grand colonnaded street, the monumental Arch of Triumph, and the majestic Temple of Bel. What remained was a ghostly shell of unparalleled beauty, a sprawling complex of ruins that showcased its unique cultural position. The architecture was a harmonious blend of Greco-Roman styles seen in the towering columns and detailed Corinthian capitals, and Persian influences evident in the ornate decorative motifs and the distinctive funerary towers where wealthy families were laid to rest. For centuries, these silent stones slept under the desert sun, known only to local communities and the occasional intrepid traveler, a magnificent time capsule of a lost civilization. Tragically, the story of Palmyra's vanishing did not end in antiquity. In our own time, the city suffered a second, more deliberate destruction. During the Syrian conflict that began in 2011, Palmyra fell under the control of extremist groups who systematically targeted its ancient heritage for destruction. Using bulldozers and explosives, they demolished the Temple of Bel, reduced the Arch of Triumph to rubble, and executed the site's esteemed head archaeologist called Al-Assad when he refused to reveal the location of hidden artifacts. This modern-day vandalism was a cultural tragedy of immense proportions, an attempt to erase a vital chapter of human history. The story of Palmyra is thus a double loss. First, its political annihilation by Rome, and centuries later, the brutal assault on its physical memory, a stark reminder that the sands of time are not the only threat to these fragile echoes of our past. Leaving behind the classical world of the Mediterranean, our search for vanished cities takes us to a landscape that challenges our very definition of a desert. In the heart of southern Africa, nestled in a region of rolling hills and dry savanna, stand the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. This is not a sea of sand, but a terrain where water can be scarce and the sun beats down with relentless intensity, an environment that demanded resilience from its inhabitants. What makes Great Zimbabwe so extraordinary and its abandonment so puzzling is the sheer scale of its achievement. These are the largest and most complex ancient stone structures in all of sub-Saharan Africa, a monumental city built entirely without mortar. The precision with which these granite blocks were cut and stacked, forming walls that curve gracefully and soar to heights of over 30 feet, is a testament to an advanced and highly organized society. For centuries, European colonists, unwilling to believe that Africans could have created such a sophisticated civilization, attributed the ruins to foreign powers like the Phoenicians or even the Queen of Sheba. We now know without a doubt that Great Zimbabwe was the work of the Shona people, the heart of a powerful kingdom that dominated the region from the 11th to the 15th centuries. The source of this kingdom's power was wealth drawn directly from the earth. Great Zimbabwe sat at the center of a vast and lucrative trading network. The interior of southern Africa was rich in gold, and the city became the central hub where this precious metal, along with ivory from elephants and other goods, was gathered. From here, trade routes stretched for thousands of miles, connecting the inland plateau to coastal ports on the Indian Ocean. Arab and Swahili merchants would wait on the coast, their house ready to carry this African wealth north to the bustling markets of the Middle East and through them as far as India and China. In exchange, the city received luxuries that signified its global connections. Beautiful Chinese celadon pottery, Persian glassware, and colorful Indian beads have all been unearthed within the ruins. This was a cosmopolitan center, a place where local power and international commerce met, creating a golden age of prosperity that funded the construction of its iconic stone enclosures. Then, around the middle of the 15th century, this flourishing city was abandoned. The great stone walls were left to the elements, and the bustling center of trade fell silent. Unlike Palmyra, there is no record of a violent invasion or a crushing military defeat. The disappearance of Great Zimbabwe is a quieter, more enigmatic mystery. Archaeologists have pieced together several plausible theories for its decline. One of the most compelling points to environmental pressure. Centuries of a concentrated population and their livestock may have led to overgrazing and deforestation in the surrounding area. This, combined with evidence of a prolonged drought, could have stripped the land of its fertility, forcing the population to disperse in search of more reliable water and pasture. Another strong possibility is that the abandonment was a political and economic decision. The kingdom centered on Great Zimbabwe was not a monolithic empire, but likely a confederation of smaller chiefdoms. As the core city grew wealthy, outlying regions may have sought their own independence, fracturing the central authority. Furthermore, the very trade routes that brought such immense wealth may have shifted. New gold fields discovered elsewhere could have attracted merchants to different centers of power, slowly starving Great Zimbabwe of its economic lifeblood. It's likely that the truth involves a combination of these factors, a slow-burning crisis where environmental stress weakened the social and political fabric until the leadership and the people simply chose to move on, establishing new centers like Kame and Mutapa to the north. The great stone walls were not destroyed, they were simply left behind, a silent and majestic monument to a kingdom that had chosen a different path, leaving one of Africa's greatest archaeological wonders to be reclaimed by the savannah for over 400 years. From the sun-baked stone of Great Zimbabwe, we travel to the fertile yet elusive landscape of the Nile Delta, to a city whose story is intertwined with Hollywood legend and a case of profound mistaken identity. This is Tanis, a name that might ring a bell for fans of adventure cinema, as it served as the fictional setting for the climax of Raiders of the Lost Ark. While Indiana Jones didn't actually dig here, the real-world mystery of Tanis is every bit as compelling as any plot dreamed up for the silver screen. For much of its modern history, Tanis was a ghost, a capital city that had seemingly evaporated from the Egyptian landscape, leading archaeologists on a wild goose chase that lasted for generations. The true importance of Tanis lies in its role as the northern capital of Egypt during the 21st and 22nd dynasties, a period known as the Third Intermediate Period. This was an era of political fragmentation when the unity of the New Kingdom pharaohs had dissolved. The powerful priests of Ammon at Thebes in the south wielded immense influence, so the pharaohs of the north established their own royal seat of power in the delta. They chose Tanis, transforming it into a magnificent rival to Thebes, complete with colossal temples, grand obelisks, and royal tombs intended to echo the glory of the Valley of the Kings. It became a vibrant political and religious center, a city designed to project the authority of a new line of kings. The man who cracked the code of Tanis was the French archaeologist Pierre Montet. In the late 1930s, while the world was on the brink of war, Montet made a discovery that would rewrite the history of the period. He uncovered the royal necropolis within the sacred precinct of the Great Temple of Ammon. Unlike the hidden valley in Thebes, these tombs were right in the heart of the city. What he found was a situation of dramatic contrasts. The tombs had been thoroughly looted in antiquity. The passages were empty of the vast piles of golden treasure found in Tutankhamun's tomb just years earlier. But the looters had missed something, or perhaps were interrupted, because within the burial chambers Montet found something arguably even more significant: intact royal burials. Most spectacular was the tomb of Pharaoh Susen's Eye. His sarcophagus was not of gold but of gleaming silver, a metal even more rare and valuable in ancient Egypt. Inside, his mummy wore an exquisite gold funeral mask and was surrounded by a stunning array of jewelry and grave goods. It was a king's ransom, preserved not by remote location, but by the very thing that had hidden the city itself. This discovery was monumental, proving that the pharaohs of Tanis were every bit as powerful and wealthy as their southern counterparts. Yet the question remained, if this great capital city with its royal tombs was so significant, how did it become so completely lost? The answer lies in the geography of the delta itself. Unlike the desert sites of Upper Egypt, where the dry air preserves monuments for millennia, the Nile Delta is a dynamic, silty environment. The Nile River, in its annual flood, has been depositing rich sediment across the delta for thousands of years. This process, which made the land so fertile for agriculture, also slowly and steadily buried ancient cities under many feet of soil. Tanis was gradually submerged by its own prosperity, the layers of civilization building up until the city vanished from sight, its great temples appearing as little more than sandy mounds in the landscape. Compounding this natural disappearance was a centuries-long case of archaeological confusion. For a long time, scholars reading biblical and ancient texts about a great delta city called Ramses believed it referred to Tanis. They spent decades looking for evidence of the famous Ramesses the Great there. The true breakthrough came when archaeologists realized that the real Pi Ramesses, the magnificent capital built by Ramesses Roman II, was actually located a few miles to the south. That city had been abandoned when a branch of the Nile it relied on silted up, and its valuable building materials, statues, obelisks, stone blocks, were systematically quarried and moved north to embellish the newer city of Tanis. So, the lost city of Tanis was, in a way, built from the ruins of another lost city. This recycling of history, combined with the relentless accumulation of delta silt, created a perfect storm of obscurity, leaving a once great capital to sleep beneath the earth, its royal silver waiting silently for a tenacious archaeologist to finally tell its story. But the story of lost empires is not confined to the sands of Egypt or the savannas of Africa. Our journey now takes us to a different kind of borderland, a place where the fate of entire civilizations was decided in the dust of battle. Nestled on the west bank of the mighty Euphrates River, straddling the modern frontier between Turkey and Syria, lie the silent mounds that mark the location of Carchemish. For centuries, this was not a forgotten ruin but one of the most critically important cities in the ancient Near East, a prize fought over by superpowers. Its story is one of layered history, a strategic fortress that served as the command center for the Hittite Empire in its southern reaches, and later became a flourishing provincial capital for the Neo-Assyrians. Its location was its entire reason for being, a natural crossroads controlling both the river traffic on the Euphrates and the vital land routes connecting Anatolia with Syria and Mesopotamia. To control Carchemish was to hold the key to the gateway between the Mediterranean world and the riches of the East. During the height of the Hittite Empire in the late Bronze Age, around the 14th and 13th centuries before the Common Era, Carchemish was a city of immense prestige and power. It was ruled by a viceroy, often a close relative of the great king, in the distant Hittite capital of Hattusa, underscoring its critical importance. The city was the empire's southern anchor, a bastion of Hittite culture and military might. Its influence was so profound that even after the catastrophic collapse of the central Hittite power around 1200 before the Common Era, event that saw the burning of Hattusa and the disintegration of their empire, Carchemish did not simply vanish. Instead, it became the heart of a surviving Neo-Hittite or Syro-Hittite kingdom, preserving Hittite traditions, hieroglyphic Luwian scripts, and artistic styles for centuries, while newer powers like Assyria rose to dominance in the region. The city's fame even echoes through one of the most widely read books in history, the Bible. In the book of Jeremiah, Carchemish is mentioned as the site of a world-altering confrontation. The prophet declares concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the Euphrates at Carchemish and which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated. This single verse points to one of the most decisive battles of the ancient world. In 605 before the Common Era, the Egyptian army under Pharaoh Necho Roman II marched north to support the crumbling remains of the Assyrian Empire against the rising power of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty. The two colossal forces met on the plains before Carchemish. The Babylonians, led by the crown prince Nebuchadnezzar, achieved a stunning victory, shattering Egyptian power in the region for a generation. This battle marked the end of Egypt as a major imperial force in the Near East and cemented Babylonian supremacy. Carchemish was the stage for this historic turning point. Despite this dramatic event, the city's own fate was already sealed. Just a few years earlier, around 610 before the Common Era, the Babylonians and their allies had already sacked Carchemish itself, bringing an end to the independent kingdom that had persisted there for so long. While it continued as a settlement, its political significance was extinguished. Over the following centuries, shifts in trade routes and the rise of new urban centers further diminished its role. The relentless silt of the Euphrates and the encroaching sands of the desert gradually buried its grand structures. Its location on a contentious modern border made archaeological exploration difficult and often dangerous. For a long time, Carchemish existed more in ancient texts than on the map, another legendary city whose physical presence had been effaced by time and conflict, a silent witness to the clashing armies that once decided the course of history on its very doorstep. From the strategic battlegrounds of Carchemish, we move deeper into the heart of the ancient Near East, to a city whose very name evokes strength and defiance. In the sun-scorched plains of northern Iraq, the magnificent ruins of Hatra stand as a testament to a different kind of power, not just military but spiritual and cultural. This was a city designed to be impregnable, a circular fortress rising from the desert, protected by massive inner and outer walls that were both high and incredibly thick, reinforced with dozens of towers. These formidable defenses were put to the ultimate test in the 2nd century of the Common Era, when the full might of the Roman Empire turned its gaze eastward. Not once but twice, the legendary Roman emperors Trajan and Septimius Severus laid siege to Hatra, confident their veteran legions could breach any wall. Yet on both occasions the city held firm. The Hatrans were masters of desert warfare, using the knowledge of their environment to their advantage. They repelled assaults, destroyed siege engines with precisely launched projectiles from their high walls, and ultimately forced the Romans into a humiliating retreat. Hatra earned a reputation as an unconquerable bastion, a thorn in the side of the world's greatest superpower, but Hatra's true significance went far beyond its military prowess. What made this city truly unique was its role as a major religious center, a sacred destination that drew pilgrims from across the region. It was known as Beit Letter 2 Beel Emakron H. Emakron, the House of God, dedicated primarily to the worship of the sun god Shamash, but also serving as a pantheon for a diverse array of deities. This was not a city of one faith, but a cosmopolitan hub of spirituality where Greek, Mesopotamian, Aramean, and Arab gods were all honored side by side. This remarkable synthesis is etched into the very stones of the city's grand temple complex. The architecture is a breathtaking fusion of styles. You can see the graceful columns and pediments of Hellenistic Greece seamlessly blended with the intricate, patterned facades of Mesopotamian tradition and the distinctive features of Arab tribal art. The temples themselves were not small, intimate spaces but colossal structures designed to inspire awe, with vast courtyards and soaring archways. Within these sacred precincts stood an equally impressive collection of statues, a veritable who's who of the divine and the earthly. Lifelike sculptures of gods and goddesses stood alongside realistic portraits of the city's wealthy citizens and rulers, their faces and attire capturing the unique cultural mix of Hatra's population. These were not crude carvings but sophisticated works of art, showcasing a high level of craftsmanship and a society that valued both spiritual devotion and individual prestige. For centuries, Hatra thrived as this dual entity, an unbreakable fortress and an open, tolerant religious capital, its prosperity fueled by its control over caravan routes and its status as a neutral ground for worship and commerce. This golden age, however, could not last forever. The threat that finally broke Hatra did not come from the west, from Rome, but from the east, from the rising power of the Sasanian Empire. In the year 240 of the Common Era, the Sasanian king Shapur I, determined to consolidate his new Persian Empire, turned his attention to the independent states within his sphere of influence. Hatra, with its legendary defenses, was a primary target. The exact details of the final siege are shrouded in legend, but one persistent story suggests that the city's fall came not from a failure of its walls, but from a betrayal from within. According to some accounts, Shapur managed to win the favor of the king of Hatra's daughter, who, swayed by promise or persuasion, opened the city gates to the besiegers. Whether this romantic tale is true or not, the outcome was devastating. the Sasanian army poured into the city, sacking it and bringing an end to its independence. With its political power shattered and its strategic importance diminished by shifting trade routes, Hatra was gradually abandoned. The desert sands slowly crept through its grand colonnades and into its temples, burying its statues and silencing its courtyards for nearly 2 millennia. Tragically, like Palmyra, Hatra's story of vanishing was given a brutal, modern chapter. After its ruins were rediscovered and designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site for their incredible preservation, the city became a victim of 21st century conflict. In 2015, extremist groups captured the area and, in a calculated act of cultural annihilation, used bulldozers and explosives to systematically destroy the ancient temples and smash the irreplaceable statues that had survived for so many centuries. This deliberate vandalism was an attack on human history itself, an attempt to erase physical evidence of a pluralistic and tolerant past. The empty plinths and piles of rubble left behind serve as a haunting, sobering reminder that the forces threatening these lost cities are not just the slow, patient work of nature, but also the swift, destructive fury of human intolerance. Our journey now carries us eastward to a crossroads of civilizations where the fortunes of empires were made and broken under the relentless Central Asian sun. In the vast Karakum Desert of modern-day Turkmenistan, the sprawling archaeological site of Merv stands as a silent witness to a scale of urbanization that is almost unimaginable today. This was not merely a city, it was a succession of metropolises, a complex of ancient urban centers built side by side, each layer representing a new chapter in a history that spanned millennia. At its zenith, Merv was one of the largest cities on Earth, a dazzling oasis of green and grandeur that served as a vital hub on the Silk Road, its influence radiating across the known world. The story of Merv begins in antiquity with the earliest settlement known as Kola, a massive circular fortification dating back to the time of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. For centuries, it served as an important administrative center, but the city truly began to flourish under the Seleucid Empire and its successors, expanding into the adjacent walled city of Kola. This district became a renowned center of learning and religious diversity, home to Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and early Christians, a testament to the cosmopolitan spirit that the Silk Road fostered. Its strategic location was its lifeblood. Merv was situated in a large, fertile oasis created by the Murgab River, an artery of life in an otherwise barren landscape. Canals channeled the river's waters to vast fields of cotton, wheat, and fruit orchards, supporting a population that would swell to staggering numbers. The Golden Age of Merv arrived with the Seljuk Turks in the 11th century. They established a new, magnificent walled city adjacent to the old ones, Sultan Kala. This became the heart of the empire, a capital of almost unbelievable splendor. Contemporary accounts describe a city of immense libraries, stunning mosques, bustling bazaars, and sophisticated urban infrastructure, including advanced water systems and public baths. Its population likely exceeded 500,000 people, making it possibly the largest city in the world for a time. Scholars, poets, and astronomers flocked to its institutions, and its libraries were said to have contained hundreds of thousands of volumes. Merv was not just a trading post, it was an engine of culture and science, a beacon of civilization whose light shone across Asia. This magnificent world, however, was about to collide with a force of unimaginable destruction. In the year 1221, the Mongol armies, having swept across Central Asia, arrived at the gates of Merv. They were led by Tolui, the youngest son of Genghis Khan, a commander as ruthless as he was effective. The city, despite its size and wealth, was unprepared for the storm that was about to break upon it. The governor surrendered, hoping to spare the population, but the Mongols were not interested in negotiation. What followed was one of the most horrific events in human history. Historical chronicles, though their numbers may be exaggerated, describe a systematic and total massacre. The entire population, men, women, and children, was said to have been driven out onto the plains, divided among the soldiers, and methodically killed. The accounts speak of pyramids of skulls erected as grim monuments to Mongol power. The city itself was then subjected to utter annihilation. Every building of significance was torn down. The intricate irrigation canals that sustained the oasis were deliberately destroyed, and the libraries containing centuries of knowledge were burned to ashes. The Mongols' goal was not merely conquest, but the complete and permanent erasure of any potential for resistance. They sought to turn a thriving center of life into a desolate warning to others. While a small settlement would later cling to life near the ruins, the great city of Merv, the queen of the world, was dead. It never recovered its former glory. The destruction of its water management system allowed the desert to begin its slow, inexorable reclamation. The sands of the Karakum gradually buried the palaces and mosques, leaving behind a vast, silent landscape of mounds and fragmented walls, a stark and sobering testament to how quickly the brightest flames of civilization can be extinguished. The story of Merv is a chilling lesson in how swiftly a civilization can be extinguished by external force, but the fate of our next lost cities offers a different, and in some ways more haunting, lesson about the consequences of our relationship with the environment itself. Far to the west, in the very heart of the Sahara Desert in what is now southwestern Libya, an entire kingdom flourished for over 1,000 years in conditions that seem utterly impossible today. This was the civilization of the Garamantes, a people who did not just survive in the hyper-arid Fezzan region. They built a powerful and sophisticated state, a network of cities and towns that became a vital bridge between two worlds. For a long time, our only knowledge of the Garamantes came from their enemies. Roman historians like Tacitus and Pliny the Elder portrayed them as savage, nomadic raiders, uncivilized desert dwellers who harassed the frontiers of the empire. This was a profound mischaracterization. Archaeological discoveries over the past several decades have completely rewritten this narrative, revealing the Garamantes not as primitive nomads, but as ingenious urban engineers who mastered their brutal environment in a way that seems almost miraculous. Their secret was hidden deep beneath the burning sands, fossil water. This was not water from recent rains, but ancient groundwater that had been trapped in vast underground aquifers for thousands of years, a legacy of a time when the Sahara was a green and fertile savanna. Tapping this prehistoric resource required a monumental effort. The Garamantes developed a sophisticated system of underground tunnels known as fagaras or kanats. This was not a technology they invented, but one they adapted and deployed on an incredible scale. They would dig a mother well deep into the aquifer, far upslope from their fields. Then, with astonishing precision, they would tunnel for miles, maintaining a gentle, consistent slope so that the water would flow by gravity to the surface near their settlements. Shafts were dug along the tunnel's route for construction, maintenance, and ventilation. This network was the lifeblood of the kingdom, a hidden circulatory system that allowed them to irrigate vast oases of crops like wheat, barley, dates, and grapes. It transformed the Fezzan from a sterile desert into a breadbasket. At the heart of this hydraulic empire was their capital, Garama, located near the modern town of Jerma. This was no simple village. Excavations have revealed the remains of a substantial urban center, with multi-story mud brick buildings, complex street layouts, and imposing public structures, including what appears to be a royal palace or citadel. The Garamantes were not isolated. Their strategic location made them the middlemen of trans-Saharan trade. Caravans carrying gold, ivory, and slaves from sub-Saharan Africa would converge on Garamantian cities, where goods were exchanged for Mediterranean products like olive oil, wine, and Roman glassware brought north by Berber and later Roman traders. Their society was complex and socially stratified, with a ruling elite, craftspeople, farmers, and likely a class of slaves or servants. They had their own written script related to ancient Berber languages and developed a distinctive material culture, creating fine pottery and skilled metalwork. For centuries, this system worked. The Garamantian kingdom was a dominant force in the Central Sahara, but their prosperity contained the seeds of its own destruction. The fossil water they were tapping was not a renewable resource. It was like a vast bank account with no incoming deposits. Every gallon they used to irrigate their fields and sustain their growing population was a gallon permanently removed from the aquifer. Over generations, the water table began to drop. Maintaining the fagaras became increasingly difficult and eventually impossible as the mother wells ran dry. The tunnels, once flowing with life-giving water, silted up and collapsed. Without water, the oases that sustained the cities withered. The desert, held at bay for so long by human ingenuity, began its relentless advance. The trade routes that had brought wealth slowly shifted or dried up as the Garamantes could no longer offer respite. There was no single cataclysmic event, no invading army that delivered a final blow. Instead, the civilization experienced a slow, grinding decline. The population dwindled, urban life gave way to a more scattered, nomadic existence, and the great mud brick buildings of Garama and its sister cities were gradually abandoned to the Saharan winds. The sands swept in, burying the evidence of this once great kingdom until modern archaeology began to piece together the true story of a people who conquered the desert, only to be ultimately defeated by the finite nature of the resources they so brilliantly harnessed. The story of the Nabateans, however, extends far beyond the iconic canyon of Petra. Their commercial empire was a vast network, and to secure it, they established outposts and secondary capitals across the desert landscape. Two of the most remarkable, offering a fascinating contrast to Petra's fame, are Hatra in modern-day Saudi Arabia and Shivta in Israel's Negev desert. Each reveals a different facet of this ingenious civilization and shares a common, poignant fate. Hatra, known anciently as Hegra and in later Islamic times as Al-Haya, was the Nabatean kingdom's southern jewel. Located in the Al-Ula Valley, it served as a critical trading hub, the first major stop for caravans traveling north from the frankincense-producing regions of Arabia Felix, modern-day Oman and Yemen. If Petra was the grand metropolitan capital, Hatra was the vital provincial headquarters, a bustling administrative and commercial center designed to project Nabatean power and culture deep into the peninsula. The most immediate connection to Petra is visual and visceral. Here, carved into the golden sandstone outcrops that rise from the desert floor, are over 100 monumental rock-cut tombs. While slightly smaller and less ornate than the most famous facades in Petra, they are stunning in their own right, featuring the same distinctive crow step motifs, eagle symbols, and elaborate inscriptions. These inscriptions are what make Hatra uniquely significant. They are not just decorative, they are legal documents, meticulously carved Nabatean texts that identify the tomb owners, their families, and the strict laws governing their use and inheritance. This provides an incredibly detailed, stone-chiseled window into Nabatean society, law, and family life that is less abundant at Petra itself. Walking among these silent necropolises, one gets the powerful sense of a satellite city deliberately echoing the architectural grandeur of its distant capital, a statement of wealth and identity in a remote but economically crucial location. Far to the northwest, in the arid heart of the Negev, lies Shivta. This city tells a later, yet equally compelling, chapter of the Nabatean story. Unlike the rock-cut splendor of Petra and Hatra, Shivta is a city of freestanding stone, a stunningly preserved urban settlement that looks as if its inhabitants simply walked away yesterday. Founded as a Nabatean way station on the incense route, Shivta truly flourished during the Byzantine period, several centuries after the Roman annexation of the Nabatean kingdom. It evolved from a trading post into a thriving agricultural community and an important center of early Christianity. The city's layout is remarkably intact, with a network of paved streets winding between sturdy stone houses, their doorways and windows still framing the desert sky. The heart of Shivta is its 3 Byzantine churches, a surprising number for a town of its size, indicating both wealth and deep religious significance. These churches, with their apses and baptisteries still clearly defined, speak to a community that had successfully transitioned from the pagan gods of the Nabateans to the new state religion of the Byzantine Empire. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Shivta is not what's above ground, but what made life possible there. The Nabateans, and later the Byzantine inhabitants, were masters of desert agriculture. They constructed an intricate system to capture every drop of precious rainwater. They paved vast catchment areas on hillsides, built dams and reservoirs to store the water, and channeled it through a network of canals and aqueducts to irrigate fields of grapes, olives, and wheat. At Shivta, you can still see the wine presses carved into the bedrock, evidence of a local industry that produced wine likely exported across the Byzantine world. Despite their geographical distance and different characters, Hatra with its monumental tombs and Hatra with its complete urban fabric, these cities ultimately shared a common destiny, one tied directly to the economic currents that had given them life. Their decline was not sudden but a slow, relentless fading. The primary cause was the collapse of the long-distance incense trade. As the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, the demand for frankincense and myrrh, so essential for pagan rituals, plummeted. Furthermore, the Romans and later the Byzantines established more direct sea routes to India and the East, bypassing the arduous and expensive overland caravan trails. The lifeblood of the Nabatean economy was gradually cut off. This economic decline was compounded by political shifts. The region experienced periods of instability, including the Persian invasion in the early 7th century and the subsequent Arab-Muslim conquest. These events disrupted old alliances and trade networks further. For Shivta, a final, crushing blow may have been a major earthquake in the 7th century that damaged its critical water systems. Without the wealth from trade to fund repairs and maintain the sophisticated hydraulic infrastructure, the delicate balance of desert life was shattered. The populations of both Hatra and Shivta dwindled over generations, eventually abandoning their cities to the silence of the desert. They were not destroyed by war or a single catastrophe, but simply rendered obsolete by a changing world, their purpose lost, leaving their magnificent stones as a ghostly testament to a way of life that the sands were all too ready to reclaim. While the Garamontes were harnessing fossil water in the Sahara on the other side of the world, an even more astonishing urban experiment was taking place. In the vast, arid plains of what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, a civilization emerged that would stand as a unique enigma in the ancient world. This was the Indus Valley civilization, a society that at its peak around 2500 before the Common Era, covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Within this vast territory, 2 cities shine brightest in the archaeological record: Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead, and Harappa. These were not just large settlements, they were the beating hearts of a sophisticated, highly organized culture whose achievements and ultimate disappearance continue to baffle historians. What immediately strikes anyone studying Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa is their stunning modernity. Unlike the chaotic, organically grown cities of Mesopotamia or the pharaonic monuments of Egypt, the Indus cities were masterpieces of pre-planned urban design. They were laid out on a precise grid pattern, with streets running north-south and east-west in almost perfect right angles. The main thoroughfares were wide enough for carts to pass, while smaller lanes branched off to residential areas. This wasn't haphazard growth, it was the result of centralized authority and a remarkable vision for urban living. The building blocks of this vision were standardized, kiln-fired bricks. Unlike the sun-dried mud bricks used elsewhere, Indus bricks were fired to a uniform size and ratio, making construction efficient and structures incredibly durable. This standardization across a region the size of Western Europe suggests a surprising level of cultural and possibly political cohesion. Perhaps the most ingenious aspect of their design was something we take for granted today but was revolutionary 5,000 years ago: a sophisticated public sanitation system. Almost every house in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had a dedicated bathroom and a latrine that was connected to a city-wide network of covered drains running beneath the streets. These drains were designed with corbelled arches and featured inspection holes for maintenance. Wastewater from homes flowed into these main sewers, which eventually carried it outside the city limits. This concern for public health and hygiene is virtually unmatched in the contemporary world. It points to a society that valued collective well-being and had the engineering skill and administrative will to implement it on a massive scale. This focus on civic order leads to one of the civilization's greatest mysteries: the absence of obvious symbols of centralized power. In sharp contrast to Egypt's pyramids and Mesopotamia's ziggurats and palaces, the Indus cities reveal no monumental temples dedicated to specific gods and no grand royal palaces filled with treasure. There are no colossal statues of kings celebrating their victories. The largest structures found are not palaces but enormous, meticulously engineered granaries, suggesting that storing and managing food for the population was a primary concern of the ruling class. The most famous artifact from Mohenjo-Daro is a small, exquisitely carved stone seal depicting a figure seated in a yoga-like posture, surrounded by animals. Is this a priest-king, a deity? We simply do not know. The power structure of the Indus Valley civilization appears to have been based on administration and trade rather than the glorification of a single ruler, making it a profound outlier in the ancient world. This mystery is compounded by their writing. The Indus people developed a complex script found on thousands of seals, pottery shards, and copper tablets. But with no Rosetta Stone to provide a bilingual key, every attempt to decipher it has failed. The inscriptions are frustratingly short, and without knowing the underlying language, they remain silent. Were they recording trade transactions, religious incantations, or royal decrees? The answer is locked away in those elegant, undeciphered symbols, a constant reminder of how much we still have to learn about this people. Then, around 1900 before the Common Era, this meticulously planned world began to unravel. The great cities were gradually abandoned. The evidence points not to a single catastrophic event, but a slow decline over centuries. One of the most compelling theories involves climate change. Geological and archaeological studies suggest that the mighty Hatra river system, which once flowed parallel to the Indus and sustained the civilization's eastern settlements, began to dry up. This was possibly due to a gradual shift in monsoon patterns, turning fertile farmland into arid plains. As agriculture failed, the economic foundation of the cities crumbled, forcing populations to disperse into smaller, more sustainable villages. Another theory points to internal decay. Some archaeologists see evidence that the careful maintenance of the cities broke down in their final phases. Drains were clogged, new buildings were constructed over main streets, and the famous standardization began to slip. This could indicate a collapse of the central authority that had kept the complex urban machine running smoothly for centuries. The old theory of an invasion by nomadic Indo-European speakers, the so-called Aryans, has largely been discredited by a lack of evidence for widespread violence in the archaeological layers corresponding to the decline. There is no layer of ash, no unburied bodies in the streets of Mohenjo-Daro to suggest a sudden conquest. The civilization did not fall with a bang, but with a whisper, a long, slow exodus as people voted with their feet, leaving their magnificent cities to be slowly buried by the very silt and sand that had once nurtured them. While the sprawling, organically grown cities of the Indus Valley represent one extreme of urban development, the Roman Empire perfected the opposite approach. the creation of a city from scratch according to a master plan. And few places exemplify this imperial order better than Timgad. Nestled against the northern slopes of the Ouras Mountains in modern-day Algeria, Timgad was not an ancient settlement that evolved over time. It was a deliberate act of creation, a brand new city founded around the year 100 of the Common Era by the Emperor Trajan. Its official name was Colonia Marciona Ulpia Traiana Thamugadi, a mouthful that honored Trajan and his family, but its purpose was crystal clear. This was a colonia, a military veterans colony, a reward for soldiers of the 3rd Augustan Legion who had served their time. It was Rome's way of planting a permanent, loyal, and highly organized piece of itself deep into the territory of the Berber tribes, a solid bastion of Roman culture in the North African landscape. The moment you see an aerial photograph or a plan of Timgad, its Roman soul is unmistakable. The city is a perfect square, a grid of streets so precise it feels like it was drawn with a ruler on a vast piece of parchment. The two main streets, the Cardo Maximus running north-south and the Decumanus Maximus running east-west, intersect at the very center of the city, creating a perfect crossroads. This intersection was the heart of public life, opening onto the Forum, a grand public square surrounded by a colonnaded portico. From this central hub, the smaller streets divided the city into regular, evenly sized blocks, a system of urban planning so advanced it wouldn't be matched in many parts of the world for over 1,000 years. For a retired Roman soldier, arriving at Timgad must have felt like coming home. The layout was instantly familiar, an orderly and predictable environment that stood in stark contrast to the untamed desert beyond its walls. But Timgad was far more than just a military outpost. Over the centuries, it grew into a thriving and sophisticated provincial city, a place that valued culture and leisure as much as security. The ruins that have been uncovered are remarkably complete, offering a snapshot of daily life in a Roman town. At the center, the Forum would have been bustling with merchants, politicians, and citizens conducting business under the shade of the porticos. Just a short walk away stands a magnificent theater carved into a hillside, its semi-circular seating capable of holding an audience of several thousand. The acoustics are still so perfect today that a whisper from the stage can be heard in the highest rows. Perhaps most impressively, Timgad boasted a substantial public library, a clear indicator of a literate and educated populace. While only the foundations remain, archaeologists have determined it was a grand building with reading rooms and shelves for thousands of scrolls, a remarkable institution for a city on the edge of the empire. And marking the entrance to the city from the west is a towering, three-arched triumphal gate dedicated to Trajan, a constant reminder to all who entered of the power and generosity of the emperor who made it all possible. This orderly Roman world, however, was not destined to last forever. The first major blow came in the 5th century with the Vandal conquest of North Africa. The Vandals, a Germanic tribe, swept across the region, disrupting the Roman administration and the economic stability that cities like Timgad relied upon. While the city was not completely destroyed, its golden age was over. Later, when the Byzantine Empire under Emperor Justinian reconquered the area in the 6th century, they attempted to revive Timgad's strategic importance. They built a fortress on the city's outskirts, reusing stones from the older Roman buildings, a clear sign that the city's population had shrunk and its urban area had contracted. This Byzantine revival was short-lived, as the region experienced further political upheaval and a gradual shift in trade routes. The raison d'etre for Timgad faded away. The sophisticated water systems that sustained it fell into disrepair, and the desert, which the Romans had held at bay for so long, began its slow, patient reclamation. The very sands that eventually buried Timgad, however, became the agent of its preservation. Just as at Pompeii, where volcanic ash froze a city in time, the encroaching Sahara Desert acted as a protective blanket. It buried the orderly streets, the forum, and the theater under layers of sand, shielding the stonework from looters and the erosive forces of wind and weather. For centuries, Timgad slept, its existence known only through vague references in ancient texts. It wasn't until 1881 that the site was rediscovered by a French expedition, and the painstaking process of excavation began. Archaeologists literally brushed away the desert to reveal one of the most perfectly preserved examples of Roman grid planning anywhere in the world. The tragedy of Timgad's abandonment became its greatest gift to history. Because it was buried so completely and left undisturbed, it offers us an unparalleled time capsule, a chance to walk down the streets of a Roman colony and see, with stunning clarity, the blueprint of an empire's ambition laid out beneath the African sun. From the perfectly preserved Roman grid of Timgad, we travel to a city with a very different story, one not of slow decline but of a brilliant, fleeting dream. In the arid plains of northern India, not far from the eternal city of Agra, stands Fatehpur Sikri, a ghostly masterpiece of red sandstone that represents one of history's most spectacular and short-lived capital cities. Its story is unique among our vanished desert settlements, for it was not lost to conquest or a long, grinding environmental crisis, but abandoned at the very height of its power and beauty, a royal capital that served its purpose for a mere 14 years. This was the grand vision of one of the Mughal Empire's greatest rulers, Emperor Akbar, a man whose ambition was as vast as his kingdom. Akbar's decision to build a new capital here in 1571 was driven by both spiritual and strategic considerations. The site was already significant to him personally as the home of a revered Sufi saint, Salam Kishti, who had accurately predicted the birth of Akbar's son and heir. In gratitude and perhaps seeking continued blessings, Akbar chose this rocky ridge to establish his power center. But this was no mere act of piety, it was a calculated move. The ridge, known as Sikri, was situated on the direct trade route linking Agra with the prosperous regions of Gujarat, placing the emperor at the crossroads of commerce and military campaigns. Akbar poured the immense resources of his empire into this project, and the result was a city of breathtaking scale and architectural harmony. Unlike the grid of Timgad, Fatehpur Sikri was a sprawling palace complex, a fusion of administrative buildings, royal residences, and sacred spaces, all constructed from the region's distinctive red sandstone. The architecture of Fatehpur Sikri is a physical manifestation of Akbar's own philosophical vision. He was a ruler deeply interested in syncretism, the blending of different religious and cultural traditions. This is vividly reflected in the city's design, which seamlessly merges elements of Islamic and Hindu styles. You can see the elegant domes and intricate geometric patterns typical of Islamic architecture existing side by side with heavily carved columns, decorative brackets, and animal motifs inspired by Hindu temple design. This was not just an aesthetic choice, it was a political statement, a deliberate effort to create an imperial style that would resonate with and unify the diverse population of his empire. The heart of the complex is a series of majestic courtyards and pavilions, each with a specific function. There is the Diwan-i-Khas, or Hall of Private Audience, where Akbar would debate with scholars and theologians of all faiths. There is the Panch Mahal, a 5-story palace for the royal women that resembles a towering wedding cake, its open pavilions designed to catch the slightest breeze. And there is the Anup Talao, an ornamental pool with a central platform connected by 4 bridges, symbolizing the emperor's connection to the 4 corners of his domain. The most awe-inspiring structure, however, is the Buland Darwaza, the Gate of Magnificence. This colossal gateway, rising over 170 feet high, was built to commemorate Akbar's victorious military campaign in Gujarat. It is the tallest gateway in the world, a staggering achievement that one approaches by climbing a grand flight of steps, an architectural feature designed to humble any visitor arriving at the emperor's doorstep. Inscribed on the gateway is a message of Akbar's inclusive religious tolerance, a proclamation that speaks to the idealistic spirit with which the city was founded. For a brief, shining moment, Fatehpur Sikri was the dazzling center of a vast and powerful empire, a symbol of imperial authority, cultural fusion, and enlightened rule. Yet by 1585, this magnificent capital was deserted. The court packed up, the army marched out, and the emperor simply left, moving the entire machinery of government back to Agra. The reason for this sudden abandonment is a subject of historical debate, but the most compelling and widely accepted theory points to a simple, fatal flaw: water. The ridge upon which Fatehpur Sikri was built had no reliable, perennial source of water. The city relied on an ingenious but ultimately insufficient system of reservoirs, cisterns, and stepwells to capture and store rainwater. While this may have been adequate for a smaller settlement or during years of good rainfall, it was utterly inadequate for a burgeoning imperial capital that required vast quantities of water for its population, its royal baths, its gardens, and its animals. Historical records and climatic studies suggest that the region was struck by a series of severe droughts in the 1580s. The reservoirs dried up and the water table dropped too low for the wells to reach. In an arid landscape, a city without water is a city without life. The very environment that had offered a strategic advantage became its death sentence. Other theories suggest that the abandonment was also influenced by the growing unrest in the northwestern parts of Akbar's empire, which made Agra a more strategically located capital from which to manage military affairs. But the primary catalyst was almost certainly the hydrological crisis. The tragedy of Fatehpur Sikri is that it was a victim of its own grandiosity. The scale of Akbar's vision outstripped the capacity of the local environment to sustain it. Unlike the Garamantes, who expertly managed a finite water resource for centuries, the Mughals, for all their architectural genius, built a city on a foundation that could not support its thirst. And so, Fatehpur Sikri was left behind, not in ruins, but in a state of perfect preservation. Because it was occupied for such a short time and built of durable sandstone, it never underwent the renovations and rebuildings that alter most ancient cities over time. It stands today exactly as it was when Akbar walked away, a ghost city frozen in the moment of its abandonment, a beautiful and poignant monument to an emperor's dream that was as magnificent as it was brief. The story of cities lost to the desert is not confined to the empires of the Mediterranean or the kingdoms of Africa. Far to the east, along the ancient trade routes that connected China with the Western world, lies one of the most formidable and deadly deserts on Earth, the Taklamakan. Its name, in the local Aigha language, is often translated as place of no return, a fitting title for a sea of sand so vast and treacherous that it became the graveyard of entire civilizations. Along its southern and northern edges, the Silk Road branched out, a lifeline of commerce and culture sustained by a fragile chain of oasis kingdoms. Two of the most evocative of these lost cities are Nia and Lulan, whose remains tell a story of incredible cultural exchange and a stark battle against an encroaching environment. Deep within the desert's embrace, the ruins of Nia offer a snapshot of life frozen in time. Discovered and excavated in the early 20th century by explorers like Aurel Stein, the site was breathtakingly well preserved by the extremely arid climate. Unlike the stone cities of Petra or the mudbrick of the Garamantes, Nia was a city of wood. As archaeologists brushed away the sand, they uncovered the skeletal frames of wooden houses, their posts and beams still standing, surrounded by crumbling walls made of wattle and daub. Walking through the ruins, one could trace the outlines of rooms and courtyards, and even identify the remains of ancient orchards, with the dried-out trunks of poplar and fruit trees still standing in orderly rows, a ghostly echo of the greenery that once made this place an oasis. The preservation was so remarkable that tools were found left behind as if the inhabitants had just stepped out. and intricate carvings on wooden beams depicted floral and geometric patterns that showed a blend of artistic influences. But the most startling discovery at Nia and across the Tarim Basin where the Taklamakan lies was not the architecture but the people themselves. Buried in the sandy soil were dozens of mummies naturally desiccated by the dry desert air. These were not the mummies of ancient China. They were tall individuals with long noses, light-colored hair, and features that were distinctly Caucasian. They were dressed in brilliantly colored woolen textiles, including tartan patterns reminiscent of Celtic cloth and felt hats. The so-called Churchan man, for instance, was buried with 10 hats, a testament to his status and a fashion sense that seemed utterly alien to the region. These mummies, dating back as far as 4,000 years, provide undeniable physical evidence of early, extensive contact between East and West, centuries before the Silk Road is traditionally thought to have been established. They were likely descendants of nomadic Indo-European peoples who migrated into the area, and their presence at Nia shows that this oasis was a multicultural hub long before it became a formal Silk Road station. While Nia gives us an intimate view of domestic life, the story of Lulan is one of greater historical fame and a more dramatic disappearance. Located on the northwestern edge of the treacherous Lop Nur Lake bed, Lulan was a critical oasis kingdom, a mandatory stopping point for caravans traveling between China and Central Asia. It was a place of strategic importance, mentioned in Chinese historical records as a fortified town that paid tribute to the Han dynasty. Yet by the 7th century, it had vanished from the records, becoming a legend, a city lost to the sands. Its rediscovery is a tale of pure adventure. In 1900, the Swedish explorer Sven Hedin was leading an expedition through the Taklamakan, attempting to map its uncharted wastes. His journey was perilous, and at one point his team was desperately short on water. By a stroke of incredible luck, they stumbled upon the remains of a wooden stupa, a Buddhist shrine poking out of the sand. Digging frantically, Hedin and his men uncovered not just the stupa but an entire city, the ruins of Lulan. What they found was a city in its death throes, preserved by the desert. There were houses, administrative buildings, and a large Buddhist monastery. Among the ruins, Hedin discovered a treasure trove of documents written on wooden slips and paper, in languages ranging from Chinese to an ancient Iranian script called Kharosthi. These texts revealed the mundane details of life in a Silk Road town: tax records, military reports, and personal letters. They painted a picture of a bustling, bureaucratic center that managed the flow of goods and people through one of the route's most challenging segments. But they also hinted at the growing struggles the city faced. The documents spoke of the increasing difficulty of maintaining the irrigation canals that were the city's lifeline. The fate of both Nia and Lulan was sealed by the same relentless force: the desert's advance, accelerated by human activity and climate change. The oasis cities of the Taklamakan were sustained by rivers flowing down from the surrounding Kunlun and Tianshan mountains. These rivers, in turn, fed the delicate ecosystems of the oases. However, the city's own success contributed to their downfall. As populations grew, they cut down the fragile poplar forests for building materials and firewood, and expanded their agricultural fields, requiring more water from the irrigation canals. This deforestation and overuse of water led to increased erosion and desertification. The rivers that fed Lulan, for example, gradually changed course or silted up, a process possibly exacerbated by a long-term trend towards a drier climate. As the water supply dwindled, the desert, always waiting at the doorstep, moved in. The sand dunes began to overwhelm the fields and then the streets, slowly choking the life out of these vibrant communities. The inhabitants likely left in a gradual exodus, abandoning their homes to the shifting sands. Lulan and Nia did not die in a single cataclysm but succumbed to a slow-motion environmental collapse, a poignant lesson in how the delicate balance between civilization and nature, when upset, can lead even the most determined settlements to simply fade away, leaving only whispers in the wind and wooden posts in the sand. Moving from the desiccated ruins of the Taklamakan, our search for vanished cities takes us to an entirely different desert landscape, one where the primary building material was not stone or wood, but earth itself. On the arid northern coast of Peru, where the rain almost never falls, stand the expansive, sun-baked ruins of Chan Chan. This was not merely a city, it was the colossal capital of the Chimu Empire, and it holds the distinction of being the largest pre-Columbian city ever built in South America. At its peak in the 15th century, it was a sprawling metropolis covering nearly 8 square miles, a labyrinth of monumental architecture that housed an estimated 30,000 people. What makes Chan Chan so extraordinary and its survival so precarious is the fact that it was constructed almost entirely from adobe, sun-dried mud bricks. In a climate as dry as Peru's coastal desert, these bricks can last for centuries, but they are ultimately fragile, destined to slowly melt back into the landscape from which they came. The heart of Chan Chan was not a chaotic urban sprawl, but a highly organized complex of 10 enormous royal compounds, known as ciudadelas. These were not public spaces, but vast, walled citadels, each one covering an area equivalent to several city blocks and surrounded by towering adobe walls that soared up to 30 feet high. These enclosures were the administrative and residential centers for the Chimu elite, essentially cities within a city. Entering one was a carefully controlled experience, typically through a single, narrow, labyrinthine entrance designed to confuse and deter invaders. Inside, the scale was breathtaking. Each ciudadela contained its own reservoirs, burial platforms for the ruler and his entourage, temples, and vast storerooms that held the empire's wealth. The true artistic genius of the Chimu, however, is revealed on the walls. The plain adobe surfaces were covered in intricate, deeply carved friezes depicting a stunning array of motifs, stylized fish and seabirds reflecting their dependence on the Pacific Ocean, abstract geometric patterns, and an endless procession of mythological beings. The most common of these is a recurring figure, part human and part animal, thought to represent a moon deity which was central to Chimu religion. These friezes were not mere decoration. They were a symbolic language asserting the power, cosmology, and identity of the ruling class, and they were protected from the rare desert rains by decorative cornices that cleverly diverted water away from the delicate artwork. But the true marvel of Chan Chan, the feat that made this immense city possible in such a waterless environment, lay beneath the surface. The Chimu were, like the Nabateans and the Garamontes, hydrological masters. The Moch River, which flowed seasonally, provided some water, but it was not enough to sustain a metropolis of this size. Their solution was a sophisticated and extensive system of groundwater irrigation. They constructed more than 80 wells and a complex network of canals to tap into the subterranean water table, transforming the desert surrounding the city into a lush, green agricultural zone. This engineered fertility allowed them to grow cotton, gourds, beans, and a variety of fruits, supporting the dense urban population and fueling the empire's economy. This mastery over water was the foundation of Chimu power, enabling them to control a vast territory stretching for hundreds of miles along the Peruvian coast. This power, however, attracted a formidable rival from the highlands. In the late 15th century, around the year 1470, the expanding Inca Empire set its sights on the rich coastal lands of the Chimu. The Inca, under the leadership of Topa Inca Yupanqui, son of Pachacuti, marched a massive army down from the mountains. The Chimu put up a fierce resistance, but the Inca employed a devastatingly simple strategy. They targeted the city's lifeline. By diverting the Moch River and possibly destroying the wellheads of the underground irrigation system, they cut off Chan Chan's water supply. A city built on hydraulic engineering was defeated by hydraulic warfare. Facing starvation and thirst, the Chimu king, Minchancaman, was forced to surrender. The Inca, following their standard practice of integration, dismantled the political structure of the empire. Minchancaman was taken to the Inca capital of Cusco, and skilled Chimu artisans, goldsmiths, weavers, and metalworkers were forcibly relocated to serve the Inca court. The heart of the Chimu Empire was ripped out. With its political and economic raison d'etre gone, Chan entered a steep decline. It was not completely abandoned overnight, but its role shifted from a vibrant capital to a provincial Inca administrative center, and its population dwindled. The final blow came with the Spanish conquest in the 16th century. The Spanish, obsessed with gold, looted the royal tombs within the ciudadelas, scattering and destroying the magnificent grave goods buried with the Chimu kings. They also established their own city, Trujillo, nearby, further drawing people away from the old adobe capital. Left largely unattended, Chan began its long, slow return to the earth. The El Niño phenomenon, which periodically brings torrential rains to this normally dry coast, became its greatest enemy. Without maintenance, the protective cornices crumbled, and the rare but devastating downpours began to dissolve the intricate friezes and soften the mighty walls. The desert wind, carrying abrasive sand, has acted like a slow sandblaster, further eroding the surfaces. Today, Chan stands as a magnificent yet fragile ghost, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that requires constant conservation efforts to stave off its inevitable reunion with the desert sands, a silent monument to an empire that mastered water, only to be conquered by those who mastered its control. Far to the north of the Peruvian coast, in the high desert plateaus of what is now southwestern Colorado, an entirely different kind of vanished city clings to the cliffs. Mesa Verde, Spanish for green table, is a world away from the vast adobe complexes of Chan, yet it shares the same poignant story of a people who thrived in a challenging environment, only to depart en masse, leaving their homes to the elements. This is not a city of grand plazas or wide streets, but a complex of villages masterfully integrated into the very rock face, a breathtaking architectural achievement that seems to defy gravity itself. The story of the ancestral Pueblones who built these dwellings is one of adaptation, innovation, and an abandonment that remains one of North America's most compelling archaeological puzzles. For centuries, the ancestors of the Pueblo peoples did not live in the cliffs. They began as farmers on the mesatops, cultivating corn, beans, and squash in the deep, fertile soils. They built pit houses and later, sophisticated masonry villages on the high plains, forming a thriving community connected by trade and culture. Then, beginning around the year 1100, a remarkable shift occurred. For reasons that are still debated, they began constructing their homes in the sheltered alcoves that pockmark the canyon walls. The result was an architectural revolution. Villages like the magnificent Cliff Palace, with its 150 rooms and 23 kivas, were not haphazard collections of buildings. They were meticulously planned communities, multi-storied structures built from hand-shaped sandstone blocks mortared with adobe mud. Access was deliberately difficult, often limited to narrow footpaths or climbable rock faces with hand and toe holds carved into the stone, suggesting a need for defensibility or a desire for privacy and separation from the world above. The scale of Cliff Palace is staggering, but it's the details that reveal the sophistication of its builders. The structures are not mere shelters, they are evidence of a complex society with specialized knowledge. The most distinctive features are the kivas, circular, subterranean chambers that served as the spiritual and social heart of the community. Entered by a ladder through a hole in the roof, these sacred spaces were used for religious ceremonies, political meetings, and weaving. The ancestral Pueblones were also skilled artisans, producing beautifully painted black-on-white pottery adorned with intricate geometric patterns, and crafting tools, jewelry, and textiles from local materials. Their understanding of their world was profound. They were keen astronomers, carefully observing the solstices and equinoxes, At sites like Sun Temple, the alignment of walls and windows likely served as a calendar, marking the passage of the seasons crucial for their agricultural cycle, demonstrating a deep connection to the cosmos that governed their lives. For over a century, these cliff dwellings bustled with life. The sounds of children playing, the smell of cooking fires, and the sight of people climbing the cliffs with water and supplies would have filled the canyons. Then, in the late 13th century, something profound happened. Within a generation or two, by around 1300, every single cliff dwelling at Mesa Verde was empty. The departure was not a panicked flight. Evidence from the ruins suggests a deliberate, organized exodus. Valuable items were taken, and doorways to some structures were sealed, as if the people intended to return or to protect what remained. But they never did. The silence that fell over Cliff Palace and its sister communities was absolute and permanent. The question of why they left has haunted researchers for generations, and the answer is likely not a single event but a perfect storm of challenges. The most prominent theory points to a catastrophic 23-year-long megadrought that gripped the region starting in 1276, as revealed by tree ring data. For a society reliant on rainfall to nourish their crops on the mesa tops, this prolonged arid period would have been devastating, leading to crop failure, famine, and intense competition for dwindling resources. This environmental stress may have triggered social upheaval. Some archaeologists point to evidence of increased violence in the period before abandonment, including possible warfare between communities, which would have made the once protective cliff dwellings feel more like traps than sanctuaries. Furthermore, the very success of their society may have contributed to its downfall. Centuries of intensive farming and harvesting of timber for construction and fuel could have led to significant deforestation and soil depletion on the mesa tops, reducing the land's ability to support a concentrated population even under normal rainfall conditions. It is also possible that a combination of these factors led to a breakdown in the spiritual and political order. If the leaders and rituals that had sustained the community for so long could no longer guarantee rain or safety, people may have lost faith in the established system. The decision to leave was probably a confluence of all these pressures, a desperate search for a more reliable source of water, more fertile land, and perhaps a new beginning. They migrated south, joining existing Pueblo communities in New Mexico and Arizona, where their descendants, the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo peoples, live today. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde were not a failed civilization, but a chapter that closed, a magnificent adaptation to a high desert world that, for a complex web of reasons, could no longer support the people who had called it home for so long. While the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde represent a community's intimate relationship with a high desert plateau, our next city showcases a monarch's obsession with conquering the coastline itself. On the shores of the Mediterranean, in what is now Israel, King Herod the Great embarked on one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world. He wasn't just building a city, he was creating a masterpiece of political propaganda and engineering audacity, a grand port literally carved from the sea and named in honor of his Roman patron, Caesar Augustus. This was Caesarea Maritima, a city designed to be a dazzling declaration of Herod's power and sophistication, a place where Roman grandeur met Judean ambition, and whose submerged ruins tell a story of both incredible creation and inevitable decay. Herod's vision was born from a practical problem and a profound desire for legitimacy. The coastline of his kingdom lacked a natural deep water harbor, a major handicap for trade and communication. But more importantly, Herod, a client king ruling on behalf of Rome, was deeply unpopular among his Jewish subjects who viewed him as a foreign puppet. Caesarea was his answer. It would be a state-of-the-art port to rival Alexandria, a new administrative capital to replace Jerusalem, and a glowing tribute to the Roman emperor, solidifying his own position within the imperial system. The centerpiece of this endeavor was the harbor, which he named Sebastos, the Greek equivalent of Augustus. This was not a simple docking area. It was an artificial marvel, one of the largest and most advanced harbors of its time. Engineers faced the formidable challenge of the open sea and a sandy, unstable seabed. Their solution was breathtaking. They constructed massive breakwaters, 2,000 feet long, by sinking enormous wooden forms into the water and filling them with a special Roman concrete that could harden underwater. These breakwaters created a safe, deep-water anchorage capable of holding hundreds of ships, complete with towering lighthouses to guide them safely to shore. It was a feat that seemed to defy nature, a harbor built where none should exist. Beyond the harbor, Caesarea was a showcase of urban luxury and Roman civic design. The city was laid out on a perfect grid pattern, with a sophisticated sewer system beneath its streets. At its heart stood a monumental theater, carved into a natural slope overlooking the sea, where thousands could gather for performances. Nearby was a massive hippodrome longer than 4 football fields, designed for the thrilling and bloody spectacle of chariot races. But perhaps the most critical engineering achievement, one that sustained the city's very life, was the aqueduct. To bring fresh water to this arid coastal plain, Herod's engineers constructed a magnificent channel that snaked for miles from the springs at the foot of Mount Carmel. This was not a hidden tunnel but an elevated masterpiece of arched masonry, a double-tiered aqueduct that marched across the landscape, delivering a constant flow of clean water to the city's public fountains, bathhouses, and the lavish palace Herod built for himself, which projected on a promontory directly into the sea. For nearly a century, Caesarea thrived as the Roman provincial capital of Judea, a bustling, cosmopolitan center where Roman governors, Greek merchants, and Jewish locals interacted, often uneasily. It was here, according to the New Testament, that the Apostle Peter baptized the Roman centurion Cornelius, a pivotal moment that marked the spread of Christianity beyond the Jewish community. It was also the city where the Apostle Paul was imprisoned for 2 years before being sent to Rome for trial, cementing its role in early Christian history. The golden age of Caesarea, however, could not last. The first major blow was geological. The very artificiality of the magnificent harbor of Sebastos contained the seeds of its own destruction. The breakwaters, constantly battered by Mediterranean storms, began to settle and break apart. Worse, the construction altered the natural currents, leading to severe silting. Within a few hundred years, the great harbor that had been Herod's pride was becoming a swampy lagoon, useless for large ships. The city's economic lifeline was slowly choked off. Political and religious upheavals further accelerated its decline. After the Muslim conquest of the region in the 7th century, Caesarea lost its status as a provincial capital. It shrank from a grand metropolis to a smaller medieval town, changing hands between Crusaders and Muslims, its classical buildings repurposed for fortifications. Then came the earthquakes. The region is seismically active, and a series of powerful quakes, particularly one in the early 2nd century and others in later centuries, toppled the hippodrome, shattered the aqueduct, and brought many of the great Roman structures crashing down. The final agent of disappearance was the coastline itself. Without a maintained harbor and with a dwindling population, the city could not fight the relentless advance of the coastal sands. Wind and sea breezes piled dunes against the crumbling walls, burying streets and courtyards. The sea, which Herod had tried so hard to tame, began to reclaim its own. Sections of the city, including parts of the royal palace and the ancient breakwaters, slowly sank beneath the waves, creating the haunting underwater archaeological park that exists today. For centuries, Caesarea Maritima slept, a collection of buried mounds and submerged stones known locally as the ruins. Its rediscovery and excavation have been a gradual process, revealing layer upon layer of history, from Herod's splendid city to a Crusader fortress. To walk among its ruins today is to witness a powerful lesson in the fragility of human ambition. where even the most advanced engineering can be undone by the patient, inexorable forces of silt, sand, and sea. Yet the allure of a lost city in the Kalahari is a tale with its own unique flavor, one born not from ancient texts or crumbling inscriptions, but from the tantalizing report of a single flamboyant showman. The legend of the lost city of the Kalahari begins not with an archaeologist, but with a man named Guillermo Antonio Farini, a stage name for the Canadian-born William Leonard Hunt. Farini was a master of spectacle, a tightrope walker, inventor, and promoter who knew how to capture the public's imagination. In 1885, seeking a new adventure to bolster his fame, he mounted an expedition into the then largely unexplored Kalahari Desert. Upon his return, he published a sensational account complete with sketches describing a remarkable discovery: the ruins of a vast, ancient city partially buried in the sand. Farini's descriptions were vivid and precise. He wrote of a massive, semicircular wall of great stone blocks, perfectly fitted together without mortar, reminiscent of the ancient ruins found in Peru or Mexico. He described pavements, courtyards, and even what appeared to be the foundations of a great temple or citadel. He claimed the stones were covered in mysterious, undecipherable inscriptions. His account was so detailed and delivered with such confidence that it sparked immediate excitement and intense skepticism in equal measure. Could this theatrical personality have truly stumbled upon a discovery that would rewrite the history of Southern Africa? Or was this simply the greatest performance of his career, an elaborate hoax designed to sell books and lectures? For decades, the mystery simmered, a siren call for adventurers and romantics. The first major expedition to seriously search for Farini's city was launched in the 1930s by a British-born journalist and politician named Lawrence Green. He and his team, armed with Farini's book as a guide, ventured deep into the arid expanse. They did not find a city of stone. Instead, they discovered something that offered a plausible, if deflating, explanation. In a remote area, they came across a spectacular geological formation, a vast natural dike of igneous rock, known as a dike, that had been weathered over eons into a dramatic, linear outcrop. The rocks were fractured into remarkably regular, block-like shapes, and the entire formation, when viewed from a distance, could easily be mistaken for a man-made wall. They found no inscriptions, no artifacts, no evidence of human settlement beyond the occasional Stone Age tool. Green concluded with a fair degree of certainty that Farini had seen this natural wonder and, either through a genuine misinterpretation or a deliberate act of embellishment, had transformed it into a lost civilization. This revelation, however, did not extinguish the legend. The human mind is uniquely wired to find patterns, especially familiar ones like the straight lines and right angles of architecture in the chaos of nature, a psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia. We see faces in clouds and castles in mountain ranges, in the vast, silent emptiness of a desert where the horizon shimmers with mirages and the mind plays tricks. This tendency is amplified. A peculiar rock formation becomes a statue. A cluster of boulders suggests a citadel. The Kalahari, with its immense sand seas and sparse vegetation, is a perfect canvas for such projections. The legend persisted because it fulfilled a deep-seated need for mystery, for the possibility that even in the most inhospitable places, great secrets remained hidden. This enduring hope spurred more searches throughout the 20th century, each armed with increasingly sophisticated technology. Expeditions in the 1960s and again in the 1980s and 90s, some even involving Farini's own grandson, scoured the region using aerial photography and satellite imagery. Time and again, they circled back to the same area and the same dramatic rock formations. The conclusion remained consistent: there was no lost city. The walls were natural quartzite and dolerite fractured by millennia of temperature extremes. The pavements were flat sheets of bedrock exposed by wind erosion. The inscriptions were simply the intricate patterns of lichen and mineral stains on the stone surfaces. Yet, to dismiss the lost city of the Kalahari as a mere hoax or a simple case of mistaken identity is to miss its deeper significance. The legend is far more powerful and in many ways more real than any collection of stones. It represents the eternal human drive for discovery, the romantic notion that the map still holds blank spaces marked "Here be dragons." Deserts, by their very nature, are the last great frontiers on Earth. Their harsh conditions have historically limited exploration, allowing myths to flourish in the uncharted spaces between known oases and trade routes. The story of a lost city in the Kalahari is part of the same grand tradition as the search for El Dorado or the Kingdom of Prester John. It is a story we tell ourselves about the potential for wonder, a testament to the idea that the world, even in the age of satellites, can still hold magnificent secrets. The true lost city was never a physical place to be found, but an idea, a shimmering mirage of history and hope that continues to captivate us, proving that sometimes the most enduring mysteries are not those buried in the sand, but those born in the human heart. From the grand coastal ambitions of Caesarea Maritima and the psychological allure of the Kalahari's mirages, we now turn to a disappearance that is arguably even more profound because it involves a void at the very foundation of history itself. Our journey brings us to the banks of the Nile, to the origins of one of the world's greatest civilizations, and to a city that should be a household name but exists today only as a ghost in the historical record. This is the enigma of Thinis, the legendary first capital of a unified Egypt, a place of such immense importance that its very absence is a gaping hole in our understanding of the dawn of pharaonic culture. Imagine the moment of unification around 3100 before the Common Era, when the warrior King Nama, also known as Menes, is said to have brought together the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. This event marks the beginning of dynastic Egypt, the start of a 3,000-year lineage of pharaohs. Every great kingdom needs a capital, a seat of power from which this new ruler could govern. According to the most authoritative ancient sources, that capital was Thinis. For centuries, Egyptologists have relied on a history written in the 3rd century before the Common Era by an Egyptian priest named Manetho. His work, commissioned by the Greek rulers of Egypt, was an attempt to compile a complete history of the pharaohs, organizing them into the 31 dynasties we still use today. In this foundational text, Manetho explicitly states that the first pharaohs of the 1st and 2nd dynasties, the very architects of the Egyptian state, ruled from Thinis. This isn't a vague myth, it's a specific historical claim from a respected source. Thinis, therefore, wasn't just any city. It was the original political heart of Egypt, the Washington, D.C. or Rome of its nascent empire, the home of the god kings who established the template for all who would follow. The city's prestige didn't end with politics, it was deeply woven into the spiritual fabric of Egypt. Thinis was the cult center for the god Osiris, the lord of the underworld and the god of resurrection. In one of the most important Egyptian myths, when Osiris was murdered and dismembered by his brother Set, his head was said to have been buried at Abydos, a city so closely linked to Thinis that they were often considered part of the same religious and administrative district. This connection elevates Thinis from a mere administrative capital to a sacred city, a place intimately associated with the cycle of death and rebirth that was central to Egyptian religion. The early pharaohs, who saw themselves as the living embodiment of Horus, the son of Osiris, would have drawn immense spiritual authority from ruling in this holy region. For a civilization that measured its legitimacy through divine right and ancestral connection, Thinis' status as the Osirian cult center was as important as its role as the seat of government. Yet, for all its documented significance, Thinis has eluded every attempt to find it. Unlike Memphis, which left behind colossal statues and ruins, or Thebes, with its valley of kings and towering temples, Thinis has vanished without a single identifiable stone, without a single inscribed monument that definitively proclaims, "I am from Thinis." Its location remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Egyptology. The most widely accepted theory, based on geographical clues from later texts, places it near or directly underneath the modern Egyptian city of Girgah, located on the west bank of the Nile. Girgah is an ancient settlement in its own right, and centuries of continuous habitation have created a profound archaeological challenge. Excavating a modern city is a monumental task requiring the expensive and complex relocation of populations and the demolition of existing structures. The ancient ruins of Thinis, if they are there, would be buried deep beneath layers of subsequent occupation from the Ptolemaic and Roman periods to the modern buildings of today. It's like trying to find a specific ancient needle in a vast living haystack. This leads to another compelling possibility, that Thinis is not under Girgah at all, but lies hidden elsewhere in the western desert, its ruins slowly being consumed by the sand. The Nile floodplain has shifted over 5 millennia, and what was once a thriving city on a major branch of the river could now be isolated in a barren landscape completely obscured by dunes. The desert has proven to be a master at hiding entire cities, as we've seen with Ubar and the Garamantian settlements. The search for Thinis is further complicated by the fact that the early dynastic period, when it flourished, was an era of relatively modest monument building. The pharaohs of the first dynasty were not yet constructing the pyramids of Giza. They were building with mud brick, a durable material in the dry Egyptian climate, but one that, over time, melts back into the earth, leaving behind less dramatic, more easily overlooked mounds known as tells. Without the obvious stone markers of later periods, identifying Thinis requires meticulous, small-scale archaeology, sifting through pottery shards and the foundations of mud brick walls, a painstaking process over a vast and uncertain area. The mystery of Thinis is more than just an archaeological puzzle. It is a haunting reminder of the fragility of historical memory. Here was a city that, by all accounts, was the cornerstone of a civilization that would endure for 3,000 years. It was the launching point for the entire pharaonic enterprise, and yet it disappeared so completely that we cannot even be sure of the ground on which its first rulers walked. Its story is a testament to the fact that even the most powerful beginnings can be erased, not by catastrophe or invasion, but by the slow, steady accumulation of time and the relentless growth of new life over the old. Thinis represents a foundational ghost, a missing piece of the human story whose silence speaks volumes about the immense spans of history that separate us from the world of the first pharaohs, a world that still lies buried, waiting for its story to be unearthed. But our exploration of vanished cities must also make room for those that exist in a different dimension altogether, the realm of myth and memory, where the line between history and belief becomes beautifully blurred. This brings us to one of the most powerful and enduring legends of the Americas, the story of Aztlan, the mythical homeland of the Aztec people. Unlike the stone and adobe ruins we have encountered, Aztlan may never have been a physical city in the conventional sense, yet its story of exodus and destiny is fundamental to understanding one of the world's great empires. The Aztecs, or more accurately the Mexica, who would go on to build the magnificent island city of Tenochtitlan, remembered Aztlan as their point of origin, a place they called home before their long, divinely guided migration. According to their own codices, the pictorial histories painted on bark paper, Aztlan was described as an island situated in the middle of a lake. The name itself is often translated as the place of whiteness or the place of herons, evoking an image of a tranquil, pristine environment. It was from this aquatic paradise that the Mexica people, following a prophecy from their patron god Huitzilopochtli, embarked on an epic journey southward. This migration was not a flight from disaster but a sacred quest, a search for the promised sign, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. This powerful omen, which they would famously find on an island in Lake Texcoco, ordained the location where they were destined to build their capital. The memory of Aztlan, therefore, served a crucial purpose for the Aztec Empire. It was a foundational myth that justified their right to rule, connecting them to a deep ancestral past and a divine mandate that legitimized their power in the Valley of Mexico. The enduring mystery, of course, is whether Aztlan was a real geographical location. The Aztec descriptions point north into a largely unknown and arid region. This has led historians and adventurers on a centuries-long search to find a historical Aztlan, potentially located in the deserts of northwestern Mexico or even the southwestern United States. The challenge is that the landscape described an island in a lake seems to contradict the idea of a desert environment. However, it is crucial to remember that climates change over centuries. What is a desert today might have been a much wetter, lake-dotted landscape 1,000 years ago. This possibility has fueled numerous theories. Some researchers have proposed the region around Lake Pátzcuaro in Michoacán, while others look further north to the Casa Grande ruins in Arizona or the complex of ancient pueblos in New Mexico's Choco Canyon, suggesting that the Aztec migration story might be a cultural memory of a real movement of peoples from the arid north into the fertile central Mexican highlands. Yet the most compelling aspect of Aztlan may not be its physical existence, but its profound cultural power. In this sense, Aztlan represents a different kind of vanishing. It is a city that vanished from the map of reality to become permanently enshrined on the map of the human spirit. For the Aztecs themselves, it was less an archaeological site to be revisited and more an ideological touchstone, a symbol of their humble beginnings and their glorious destiny. In modern times, the concept of Aztlan has taken on a new life, particularly within the Chicano movement of the 1960s and 70s. It was adopted as a powerful symbol of cultural identity and connection to an ancestral homeland for Mexican Americans in the United States, representing a spiritual claim to a land rich with history. The search for Aztlan, therefore, is about much more than finding ruins. It is a quest for origin, for identity, and for understanding how a people's belief in a legendary past can shape their present and future. It stands as a powerful reminder that some of the most important cities are not made of stone, but of stories, and their power to captivate and inspire can be every bit as real as any wall reclaimed by the sand. And so we arrive at our final destination, a city that exists in the delicate space between cartography and dream, a legend that has drawn explorers to their doom and inspired tales of romance and adventure. From the foundational silence of Thinis and the spiritual homeland of Aztlan, we venture into the heart of the Sahara for the quintessential lost oasis, Zerzura. For centuries, this name has been whispered in the tents of Bedouin tribes and scribbled in the margins of European maps, a siren call from the most arid and unforgiving desert on Earth. Unlike the cities we have explored with known ruins and documented histories, Zerzura is a phantom, a story whose power lies not in archaeological proof, but in the timeless human yearning for a hidden paradise. The legend of Zerzura is beautifully simple and profoundly alluring. It was known as the Oasis of Little Birds, a place of vibrant green set like an emerald in an endless sea of sand. The stories describe a white city, its buildings gleaming in the sun, its gates curiously unlocked, inviting the weary traveler inside. But within this tranquil scene lay a magical slumber. The king and queen of Zerzura, along with their entire court, were said to be in an enchanted sleep, waiting for a destined hero to awaken them. This was not a city destroyed by war or environmental collapse. It was a place preserved in a perfect moment, a sanctuary hidden from the world by the shifting dunes, a secret reward for those brave or lucky enough to find it. This romantic image captured the Western imagination during the golden age of exploration, becoming a staple of lost world literature and fueling the ambitions of real-life adventurers. The search for Zerzura reached its zenith in the early 20th century, transforming from a Bedouin folktale into a serious, almost scholarly pursuit. This was the era of the Zerzura Club, an informal group of British explorers and soldiers who became obsessed with unlocking the desert's secrets. Among them was Ralph Bagnold, a pioneering desert explorer who developed new techniques for driving vehicles across soft sand, and whose work would later be crucial for the long-range desert group in World War II. But the figure most famously associated with the hunt is the Hungarian Count Laszlo Olmosy, whose life would later be romanticized in the novel and film The English Patient. Olmosy was not a treasure hunter, he was a meticulous explorer who combined local knowledge with emerging technologies. He learned desert lore from his Bedouin guides, studied ancient caravan routes, and took to the skies in rickety biplanes, becoming one of the first to use aerial reconnaissance to search for lost oases from above. For these men, Zerzura was the ultimate prize, a geographical mystery that represented the last great blank spot on the map of North Africa. Their expeditions were feats of incredible endurance. They navigated by the stars and by the subtle textures of the wind-sculpted sand, venturing into the hyper-arid depressions of the Libyan desert like the Gilf Kebir and the Great Sand Sea, landscapes so harsh they seemed to defy the possibility of life, let alone a lost city. Olmosy and his contemporaries did make astounding discoveries. They found prehistoric rock art in caves deep within the Gilf Kebir, proving that the desert had once been a green savanna teeming with life, a discovery that gave credence to the idea that ancient legends could be rooted in a distant, wetter past. They even found a few small, previously unknown oases, but the gleaming white city of Zerzura, with its sleeping monarchs, remained elusive. The explorers would return from their grueling journeys with tales of mirages that taunted them with visions of palm trees and water, only to have them dissolve into the heat haze as they drew near. In our modern age, with the entire planet mapped by satellites that can see through cloud cover and even penetrate the top layers of sand, the literal existence of a large, hidden city like Zerzura has been effectively debunked. There is no white-walled oasis waiting to be found. The landscapes these explorers traversed have been scanned and analyzed, revealing no structures, no signs of a settlement large enough to match the legend. The romantic quest that consumed Olmosy and his peers appears, from a purely scientific standpoint, to have been in vain. Yet to declare the mystery of Zerzura solved is to miss its enduring significance entirely. The true power of Zerzura was never its physical reality, but what it represented. For the Bedouin, it was a story of a promised refuge, a symbol of hope in an unforgiving environment. For the early 20th century explorers, it was the embodiment of the unknown, a justification for pushing the limits of human endurance and technology, for venturing into terra incognita simply for the sake of discovery. Zerzura is the ultimate desert mystery because it is ultimately a story about ourselves. It is a metaphor for the quest for knowledge, for the unshakable belief that there is always one more secret, one more beautiful and untouched place just beyond the horizon. The White City may not be real, but the human drive to search for it most certainly is. In the end, Zerzura is not a place on any map, but a destination of the spirit, a timeless reminder that the greatest treasures are often not the ones we find, but the transformative journeys we undertake in their pursuit. It is a fitting finale to our exploration of vanished cities, a legend that assures us that as long as there are deserts, there will be dreams of oasis, and as long as there are dreams, the search for what is lost will never truly end. As we have journeyed from the whispering sands of Arabia to the high cliffs of Colorado, a clear and sobering pattern begins to emerge from the dust. The specific stories of Ubar's sinkhole, Petra's shattered aqueducts, and the Garamonte's depleted aquifers are not isolated tragedies. They are variations on a fundamental theme of human existence in arid land. The first and most universal thread connecting these vanished cities is their delicate and ultimately fatal relationship with water. In the desert, water is not merely a resource, it is the very currency of life, and the ingenious systems designed to control it became the single point of failure for countless civilizations. The success of these cities was a spectacular act of defiance against a dry world, but it created a profound dependency. When a multi-decade megadrought struck the ancestral pueblones of Mesa Verde, their meticulously managed rainfall runoff was no longer enough. When the groundwater the Garamontes tapped, a legacy from a wetter age, was finally exhausted after centuries of use, their fagaras turned to dust. And when the Moguls built the magnificent Fatehpur Sikri on a ridge with no perennial water source, a few years of drought were all it took to force an emperor to abandon his dream capital. These were not sudden, unexpected calamities, but often the culmination of a slow-burning crisis where environmental pressure gradually overwhelmed human ingenuity, turning oases back into deserts and proving that no amount of architectural splendor can survive a prolonged thirst. Closely linked to the hydrological struggle is a second, powerful force of abandonment, the shifting currents of global commerce. A city's prosperity is often tied not to its own resources, but to its position as a link in a chain of exchange, and when that chain is broken, the city can wither with startling speed. Consider the fate of the Nabatean outposts of Hegra and Shivto. Their entire purpose was to service the lucrative trade in frankincense and myrrh. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, the demand for these pagan ritual resins plummeted. More critically, the Romans mastered monsoon-powered sea routes to India, rendering the arduous, expensive overland caravan trails obsolete virtually overnight. The lifeblood of the incense route stopped flowing, and the cities that depended on it were left stranded, their economic reason for existing erased by a decision made in a distant capital and the skill of foreign sailors. Similarly, the great trading hub of Merv saw its influence wane as political control shifted and new powers redirected the flow of goods. A city could be perfectly hydrated, its fields green and its reservoirs full, but if the merchants no longer had a reason to pass through its gates, its wealth and population would inevitably drain away, leaving it a ghost town sustained by nothing but its own echo. Then there is the most dramatic and deliberate agent of disappearance, conquest, where water failure and economic decline are often slow, grinding processes. The impact of war is swift, brutal, and absolute. The historical record is scarred with examples of cities not just defeated, but systematically erased from the map as a statement of power. The Mongol destruction of Merv stands as one of history's most chilling examples of this practice, known as herbicide, the killing of a city. The goal was not merely to conquer but to terrify, to create a warning so graphic that future opponents would surrender without a fight. The pyramids of skulls built by Tolui's armies were a deliberate act of psychological warfare, and the thorough destruction of libraries, temples, and the vital irrigation canals ensured that even if people wanted to return, they could not. The city was not just sacked, its potential for future life was extinguished. The Roman sack of Palmyra after Queen Zenobia's revolt served a similar purpose, to make an example of a challenger and ensure no other client kingdom would dare test the empire's might. In these cases, the desert's reclamation was merely the final act in a tragedy scripted by human violence, the sands covering a wound inflicted by sword and fire. Ultimately, the stories of these 25 cities reveal that their fates were rarely the result of a single cause. More often, it was a cascade of failures. A prolonged drought might weaken a city, leading to social unrest and making it vulnerable to a rival power it could have once resisted. The slow silting of a harbor, as happened at Caesarea Maritima, might strangle its economy at the same time as political changes marginalized its importance. The most resilient cities were those that could adapt, but the very specialization that made them successful in their golden age, whether as a trade hub, a hydraulic empire, or a fortified bastion, often made them brittle and incapable of change when the world around them shifted. Their disappearances serve as powerful, timeless lessons about the fragility of even the most advanced civilizations when confronted with environmental change, economic disruption, and the naked ambition of rivals. They are haunting reminders that the sands of the desert are patient, and that the ruins we marvel at today are not just monuments to human achievement, but also to the complex and often precarious balance that sustains it. The rediscovery of these lost cities reads like a series of grand adventures, tales where scholarly dedication collided with old-fashioned exploration in the world's most unforgiving landscapes. The story of Petra's return to the Western world is a classic example, a narrative of disguise and daring. In 1812, a young Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, fluent in Arabic and deeply knowledgeable about Islamic culture, embarked on a quest funded by the British African Association. His mission was to find the source of the Niger River, but his path took him through regions rich with local legends of a magnificent lost city. Posing as an Arab scholar named Sheikh Ibrahim ibn Abdallah, Burckhardt gained the trust of a Bedouin guide who, after much hesitation, agreed to lead him through a narrow, winding canyon. What emerged from that sikh was not just a rock face, but the breathtaking facade of the treasury, its intricate carvings glowing in the rose-red stone. Burckhardt, unable to risk his cover by showing too much interest or taking detailed notes, could only make a brief, clandestine visit. He scribbled in his journal his conviction that these ruins were indeed the lost city of Petra, a belief he confirmed before continuing his journey, never to return. His report ignited the imagination of Europe and launched a new era of archaeological exploration in the region. In the vastness of Central Asia, another figure became synonymous with the hunt for lost cities, Sir Aurel Stein. This Hungarian-born British archaeologist was a human dynamo, conducting multiple expeditions into the Taklamakan Desert in the early 20th century. His method was a blend of immense physical endurance, scholarly rigor, and a remarkable respect for the local knowledge that was essential to survival. Stein relied heavily on guides from the few oasis communities, men who understood the lethal moods of the desert. It was often their stories, passed down through generations, that pointed him toward promising mounds of sand known as tells. His most famous discovery, the abandoned Buddhist kingdom of Dunhuang and its legendary library cave filled with millennia-old manuscripts, was made possible by a local Taoist caretaker. But Stein's work in the desert itself was grueling. He and his team would battle scorching heat, biting winds, and a constant, gnawing thirst. They excavated sites like Nia with painstaking care, brushing away the sand to reveal wooden posts, ancient tools, and the stunningly preserved mummies that testified to the region's ancient multiculturalism. Stein's expeditions were monumental efforts that filled crates with artifacts for museums in London and Delhi, providing the physical evidence that turned Silk Road legends into historical fact. The tools of the desert archaeologist have evolved dramatically from the picks and brushes of Burckhardt and Stein's time, though the fundamental challenges remain. Today, the first glimpse of a potential site often comes not from a Bedouin's tale, but from the eye in the sky. Satellite imagery has revolutionized the field. Archaeologists can now analyze vast stretches of desert from their desks, using multispectral sensors that can detect subtle differences in soil moisture and vegetation growth. These differences can reveal the ghostly outlines of ancient walls, roads, and irrigation canals buried just beneath the surface features completely invisible to someone standing on the ground. This technology was pivotal in the search for Ubar, where space shuttle radar penetrated the dry sand to map ancient caravan routes. An even more powerful tool is LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Mounted on an aircraft or drone, LIDAR fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring how long they take to bounce back, it can create an incredibly detailed, three-dimensional map of the surface, effectively digitally stripping away vegetation and even sand to reveal the topography beneath. In dense jungle or under light desert sand, LIDAR can expose the foundations of entire cities, providing a blueprint for targeted excavation. Once a site is identified, the real physical work begins, and it is a race against multiple clocks. Excavating in a desert is an exercise in extreme logistics. Every drop of water, every morsel of food, and every piece of equipment must be transported across trackless wastes. Teams face relentless sun, sandstorms that can bury a dig site in hours, and temperature swings that can shatter fragile artifacts. The very act of excavation is a destructive process. Once a layer is removed, it cannot be replaced. This demands meticulous record-keeping, with every artifact photographed, plotted on a grid, and its context carefully documented before it is moved. But the greatest threat is often not natural but human. The rediscovery of a site can instantly make it a target for looters who descend under cover of darkness to ransack tombs and walls in search of sellable artifacts, destroying the archaeological context that gives those objects their historical meaning. This illegal trade fuels a black market that erases our shared heritage piece by piece. Furthermore, climate change poses a new and accelerating danger. Increased desertification and more frequent, intense sandstorms can rapidly rebury sites or scour exposed ruins into dust. The rare but devastating rainstorms, possibly intensified by shifting weather patterns, can turn a dry wadi into a raging flash flood in minutes, washing away millennia of history. For every day, an archaeologist spends carefully brushing sand from a fragile wall painting. They know that time, the elements, and human greed are working against them, making the modern quest to uncover these lost cities as urgent as it is fascinating. From the rock-cut grandeur of Petra to the ingenious underground waterways of the Garamontes, the stories of these 25 cities reveal an incredible tapestry of human ingenuity. We have witnessed empires built on the scent of frankincense, kingdoms sustained by fossil water, and capitals carved from cliffs. Each civilization mastered its environment in a unique way, creating dazzling oases of culture in the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. Yet, their collective fate offers a poignant and universal lesson about the fragility of human achievement. No matter how powerful, how well adapted, or how magnificent a society becomes, it is never truly permanent. The very strategies that ensure survival, complex trade networks, sophisticated water management, formidable defenses, can become vulnerabilities when the world changes. A shift in climate, a new trade route, or the ambition of a rival can unravel centuries of progress, reminding us that civilization is a delicate balance, not a guaranteed state. These stories challenge our perception of deserts as empty, lifeless wastelands. We now see them for what they truly are, vast, open-air museums preserving the secrets of our shared human past. The sand that swallowed Ubar and the silt that buried Tannis did not erase history. They simply placed it in storage, protecting it for future generations to discover. Every dune might conceal a palace wall, every rocky outcrop might be the last remnant of a temple. The desert's harshness, which demands so much from life, also possesses a unique power of preservation, freezing moments in time with a clarity that more temperate climates cannot match. These landscapes are not voids on the map, but libraries of stone and sand, holding the archives of dreams, ambitions, and entire ways of life that have long since vanished from the living world. The journey through these lost cities does not end here. History is a continuous excavation, and new technologies are allowing us to peer deeper into the past than ever before. The next great discovery might be waiting beneath the sands of the Sahara, hidden in a canyon of the Taklamakan, or even lying undiscovered beneath a modern city. The story of our species is still being written, and understanding these forgotten chapters is crucial to understanding ourselves. They are cautionary tales about resource management, testaments to human resilience, and humbling reminders of our place in the grand sweep of time. We are left with a sense of awe for what was accomplished and a sobering respect for the forces that ultimately reclaim all things. Now we turn the discovery over to you. With 25 incredible stories to choose from, which of these vanished cities captures your imagination the most? Is it the defiant glory of Palmyra under Queen Zenobia, the mysterious planned streets of the Indus Valley, or the haunting, short-lived perfection of Fatehpur Sikri? Let us know in the comments below which lost civilization you would most want to see brought back to life, even for a single day. If you enjoyed this journey into the sands of time, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the world's greatest historical mysteries. The desert has given up many of its secrets, but countless more are still waiting